Well, welcome everyone to the Charles Aris Podcast. I am Kim Shapiro, Executive Director of Aris Amplify. I am here with Jordan Purdy, who I will allow him to introduce himself in just a moment, but I'll give a quick update as to who Aris Amplify is so that it all makes sense. So Aris Amplify is a contingent-based search firm under the umbrella of Charles Aris Inc., which is an executive retained search firm. We are, again, contingent based. We have 4 areas of specialization: accounting and finance, HR and executive support, engineering and operations, which is what Jordan leads for our organization, and we have sales and marketing. And on that note, Jordan, I'll turn it over to you so you can share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so like Kim mentioned, I am the engineering and operations account manager here. So I run our engineering and operations vertical, and I specialize in filling really any type of specialty engineering role, operation management, and supervision, mainly at the plant and manufacturing level. But we can also work within many different organizations. And I have about 8 years of experience working specifically in this vertical.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jordan. And I have been doing this for, my goodness, almost 20 years now. It kind of makes me feel old when I say that. But the good news is I've got a lot of experience in the topic that we're going to discuss today. And that is we have an awesome interview guide that was designed specifically for hiring authorities. So it's really great, I would say, for really 3 audiences: those new hiring managers that really haven't had the opportunity to do any or a lot of internal interviewing for their team. So it's just chock full of goody goodness for those individuals. And then it's also great for those more seasoned hiring authorities that I would say maybe they're just looking to polish up their process, or they're just looking to really kind of peel the layers back on their process and see how can we make this better. And then also HR professionals that are looking to assist their hiring managers within the organization, or perhaps even for themselves, but specifically trying to implement a process, but not really sure how to go about doing that. So we have this awesome guide that is like a 17-page document that is just so wonderful that our marketing team put together. But today, we're really only going to talk about 3 things, just because we don't want to, just give everything, because we don't want people tuning out. We know this isn't probably the most exciting topic in the world, but it is essential, right? So we're going to talk about 3 things. We're going to talk about the objective of the interview, right? The whole reason for the season. And then we're going to talk about timing. 2 separate topics on that. So we're gonna drill that down to Jordan's gonna spend some time talking about just the timing as a collective, so your interview process, if you will. And then I'll spend some time talking about the actual interview agenda, we'll call it. And then third, we're going to talk about selling the job, selling the role, selling the company, and the opportunity itself. So let's get started, Jordan. I know we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and I think we could have probably had a 2-hour long dialogue about it. So I'm excited for this. This will be great. Well, let's just kick it off with our number 1 topic, which is the objective. So I think most know the objective of the interview, obviously, is to identify quality candidates, qualified candidates, candidates that are available, and candidates that are interested. This is great for those that are partnering with a search firm. And this guide is fine for those who are not partnering with a search firm. If you are learning how to conduct interviews or polishing up your process, this is going to work either way. But if you are partnering with a search firm, hopefully that qualified, that available, that interested piece of the objective is done for you, right? In that preliminary screening process with your partnered firm. Would you agree with that, Jordan?
Yes, yes. So this should partner either way, right? So it's about identifying your A players and then being able to sell and make sure you can bring in those A players within your niche or your industry. So this is a great guide that's going to help anybody that's interviewing understand what's important to the candidate and then how to really deliver that important information to them in a good way, while also being able to screen out people that aren't qualified or aren't a good fit for your organization.
Right. And if you had to say, from the objective perspective, the key thing for identifying talent for your team. And we talk about, them being qualified, of course, right? And them being available and interested. But even beyond that, we were talking about something yesterday that we're like, it is like the key thing. Do you remember what it was that we were talking about?
I mean, I think the key thing is it comes down to culture fit and how that person's going to work with your organization at the end of the
Right.
day. That's the most important thing when you're bringing in new talent is that they have the skills needed, but they also can work within your organization in an effective manner.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, let's dive in just a little bit to the qualified, the available, and the interested, and kind of how to drill down on those just a little bit, just to provide a little insight on that qualified piece. There are different styles to interviewing. Some organizations like to do what's more of an experience-based interview process, and then others like what's more of a behavioral-based interview process. Talk a little bit about the experience-based, and I'll talk a little bit about the behavioral.
Yeah, definitely. So first off, on the experience-based side of things, we're just talking about is this person going to be able to accomplish the things you need to have done in the job? I think the most important thing when you go into any interview process and you're hiring for a position is to have a set goals of what this person needs to accomplish in 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 5 years from now, right? Like where do you want this position to accomplish and what do you want this person to be able to do? So then you can really identify the key skill sets that you need and that way you can dive into that experience level to make sure they fit that goal for you. Because someone might be very experienced in your field, in your industry, but what they've done is completely different than what you want to accomplish, and then they might not be a great fit for the role. So really diving in and knowing what you want as a hiring manager or as an interviewer, so that way you know what questions to ask and how to really hone in on what those questions are to make sure they're the right person for the job.
Thank you for that. I think that's perfect. And on the behavior-based process or method, whatever we want to call that, that's really more where if you hear things like, or if you like to ask questions, please describe a time or tell me about a situation where, how would you handle? It's really situational based type questioning strategies. It's trying to peel the layers back to see how someone's going to operate in a certain situation and how they have in the past. Very anecdotal, right? They want stories. They want you to share something tangible that they can say, yeah, I like the way you handled that. On the opposite, not so sure I would have handled it that way. So, and it's really up to the hiring manager. Oftentimes it's up to the organization. These things can be organizationally sort of across the board. It may not be like each individual hiring authority has their style. It could be something that's adopted by the organization and how the organization is going to vet individuals. But the guide is actually great because it'll break down those two into a more detailed description, if that makes any sense. And the next one, so that's determining the quality piece. As far as availability, I feel like that is kind of everybody understands what the availability is from a generic or high level standpoint, but it's more than just, are they available? It is like, where do they live? Is there a non-compete situation in place? Is there an immigration situation that has to be addressed? There's so many variables to be taken into consideration in that availability or available bucket. That's what I can think of. Would you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, it really comes down to are there any red flags when it comes to their availability to take the job right now? If they're talking to you, there's probably they believe there's ability for them to be available to take the job, but
Right.
there's many cases where someone is open to relocation until they're not. Someone is doesn't have any ties to not leaving their company until that there is that reason to stay. So being able to identify those red flags and then come off of those red flags and be able to make a good decision that's you're not wasting your time moving forward because they are going to be available and be able to take that next step.
Exactly. I agree with that. And then on the interested front, I feel like, this is actually a tricky one because there are a lot of candidates that are open to hearing about new
Mhm.
opportunities, but they're not really all that interested in making a move, right? We're going to call them the tire kicker candidates. Like they'll throw their name in the hat, they'll go through the process just to see what happens. They're not really fully engaged in the process. Do you have any tips for hiring authorities on how they can kind of weed out the tire kickers, if you will?
Yeah, so I think with interests, testing their interest at points, making them have to do something to kind of prove their interest. And it could be as small as sending references to you in an email, or it could be having them answer questions. It could be jumping on another interview, making sure that that interest is real. It can't just be the, you want to make it easy for them, right? Because you want them to continue to move in the process, but you also want to make sure that it's not too easy that they can just fake their way till they make it at the end of the day. So we want to make sure that they're having to put a little bit of skin in the game. So we're not the only ones doing that.
I agree with that. And I think a lot can be said or identified by just their energy level, their engagement, right? Just from a dialogue perspective, in little things like, are they on time for the
Mhm.
interviews? Are they prepared? Do they have questions? Like, do you feel like you're being interviewed as a hiring authority just as much as they're interviewing you? That's a good sign, actually.
Mhm.
That means they're fully engaged. They want to know more, and they're hoping that you can give them additional details to keep them engaged in the process. Candidate, and they're just answering questions, you're getting head nods, pulling teeth, like it's like getting them to answer a question is a challenge. They may not be, you might have identified a tire kicker in that scenario. They may not be fully engaged in asking, I would say, very thoughtful questions. And then, just the responses, I think you just alluded to that or spoke to that. And I think that's huge too. Asking the right questions and how they engage with those questions.
Definitely. And to add on onto that is if you identify red flags that seem to be a deal breaker down the road when it comes to interest, like it could be a possibility, never be afraid to take something away from somebody. Right?
Yeah.
If you take it away and they fight for it, then you know that they're interested and you can definitely let them back into the process or not make any changes. But if you take it away and they just accept that or they just don't move forward, then you probably found out and you might have found that decision out before you hired them or got to an offer stage or wasted a lot of time.
Are you able to give an example to like what you mean when you say take it away? Are you saying, tell them you're not interested in moving forward in the process? Because most are just going to let that go,
Yeah.
right? Most even interested candidates will probably let that one go. Do you have an example that might be helpful?
Yeah, so let's say I have a candidate. This is a perfect example, kind of going through now. A candidate that missed their first interview with us. We had a Teams or a Zoom interview. She missed her first interview. She called me back an hour later and wanted to talk then. So that's we had our conversation, went through it again. She didn't send me a resume for 3 or 4 days, and so we went through this process of, is she really interested or is she just kind of wanting to put her name in the ring? And so I told her pretty much, I wanted her to take a weekend to think about it and to get back to me. We're going to continue to do what we have to do. And if the process is gone, we're moving forward with other candidates. It is what it is. But we, I really want to make sure she's interested. And then she called me back the next day and the communication picked up and really calling out, I guess, why you're doing that is important. So not necessarily just saying, I'm taking this away. I'm taking this away because you're not being very communicative. You're showing up late. You're not punctual. So we really need to, from my perspective, we have experience in doing this. So that's a red flag to me. And I'm going to call that out and then kind of let them, tell me what they want to do based off of that information.
That's good. That makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. So let's move into our number two thing that we wanted to discuss. So obviously one was the objective, two was timing. And so this is a big one. This is a
Hmm.
big, big one, especially in our world. And frankly, anyone in the hiring process on the employer side, this is going to be something that's going to be wildly impactful from a positive or negative
Yeah.
perspective, depending on how
Yeah.
tight your process is. And I'll let you speak to this, but I can tell you by and large, when we have opportunities that we have fully engaged candidates, and we have clients who know what they want, they know what they need. They're, they have I'm going to say that the only thing they're lacking is a solid process for interviewing. You have all the variables in place. Everything is, the stars are aligned, but it doesn't happen. Like the offer, we never get to offer stage. And oftentimes that is because of the length of time between the first interview and the potential offer stage, or where we get to the end of the hiring process. It's timing, that there's just too much time between point A and the end of the process. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes, definitely. So I'll say, first off, time kills all deals, and
It
that's
really
almost
does.
in anything, but it's especially true in recruiting and in bringing in A players. And we're not talking about C players. We're talking about the A players in your field, the people you want on your team that are going to drive your organization to the next level. And so, a lot of companies and hiring managers, when we say we want to shorten the process, their mind goes to, we want to shortchange your process and your decision making process, and that is not the goal of shortening the process. The key thing with interview process, and we've talked about it a few times, is knowing what you want and knowing who you want them to speak with, having that outlined from day one. And so that way, when they go through the process, it's not, we have to wait and see what the next steps are, or we want to take a week to try to find something else or to try to do this. It's continuously moving and keeping the momentum going, because that's going to continue to drive interest. A good example of this, we're actually working with a client now who they're hiring a management level position, very important position in their organization, and they wanted to do 4 interviews. That's a lot of interviews for a candidate, 4 video interviews before we even get to the in person. But they had it drawn out. They knew exactly who was supposed to speak to, and they had the next interview set up within 24 hours of the previous one, and it was within 2 to 3 days. We did 4 interviews in 2 weeks. That momentum, that candidate is very interested. He went through their process. They didn't shortchange anything, but it still kept that momentum going. And he's now very interested in an opportunity that he's an A player for. It can be a great fit, versus if they would have done 4 interviews over 4 weeks, we probably would have lost him.
Looking for your next opportunity? Discover exciting middle and senior level roles on our job board. And don't forget to subscribe to the Aris Amplify newsletter for the latest insights. Visit the link in the description to learn more.
Right. Exactly. So bottom line is really, really spend some time to identify and figure out what your interview process is going to look like. Who are the individuals that are key players in the process? Who do these candidates need to meet with? And how many rounds do you think you need? And I would err on the side of, 3 should suffice.
Mm-hmm.
Typically what that looks like for anyone that's interested is an initial Zoom or phone call or Teams interview, and then the vetting of, do I want to bring this individual? Do we click, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they do, then moving them to an in-person with the hiring authority for an hour, or however long that takes. And then that third and final traditionally could be if you're having another internal party meet someone to do an additional vetting, a tour, sort of like the logistics before the offer, if you will. And that should, for most opportunities, be a sufficient process. Now, I know that there's always caveats. There's always, there can be kinks in the system, right? But
Mm-hmm.
by and large, that should be a good typical process. Would you agree?
Yes, and it kind of depends a little bit too on, so are you using a search firm? Who is the first interview with? Is it with a recruiter? Is it with an HR person? Or is it with the hiring manager? I think the hiring manager definitely needs to meet somebody over video. I think when we start stacking video interviews, we do have to be mindful that a lot of these candidates do have jobs and they go to work, and we don't want to do video interviews from our car, right? Nobody wants to come off that way, but it's hard sometimes to get home, and especially multiple times. And it's hard to get off work. So really being mindful of, if it's an HR interview, maybe let's do that over the phone, and then we can move to a video interview for the second one with the hiring manager and kind of go from there.
Right. I agree with that. And then kind of moving towards the timing of the actual interview. I really think that some struggle with having a set agenda, knowing exactly, like, for the first 5 minutes, this is what we're going to discuss. And the next 10 minutes, this is what we're going to discuss. And I'm not saying it's always going to stay exactly true to form, but having a set agenda is helpful for multiple reasons. And one is occasionally you're going to get that candidate that's a little bit chatty. Potentially, they are a little verbose. They like to talk in circles, and it's hard to rein them back in if you don't have a set agenda. But if you have a set agenda, when you first sit down to engage in the meeting and to discuss, this is how this is going to go. There's a few things that I'd like to cover and discuss. I call this an upfront contract, where you are basically setting the stage for what's to come, so that when you have to reel the conversation back to the agenda or to the timeline that you have previously set for yourself, it's easier to do that. And because I know it can be uncomfortable, and not everyone is comfortable stopping in the middle of a conversation saying, okay, but we have to get back on topic. It can feel a little awkward. But if you've discussed that up front, that there is an agenda, we do have to stay in honor of your time, and of course of mine as well, we are going to try to follow this as close as we can. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah. So with the interview and having an agenda and how you can follow things, first off, our time is important, right? As a hiring manager, as a recruiter, as an HR person, anybody in the organization, your time is valuable, and
Well,
you
and
need
the
to set.
candidate too, their time as well.
Exactly. And so both parties, you want to try to keep it to that section of time, whatever you have agended out. And this will help you just stay on track there. So even if you go over, you're talking about a few minutes and not 30 minutes or an hour over your allotted time. You don't want to shortchange anything again, but you want to make sure by having an agenda, you can cover everything you need to do while also not taking up too much of your time. And planning is super important, to just make sure that you cover every detail that you want to cover, and you don't come off the interview saying, well, I meant to ask him this, or I meant to do this. You're in a better situation.
Fair. And also just being mindful of the fact that the majority of these individuals are likely working. They are taking time away from their current opportunity for something that may or may not ever come to fruition. And so they are, I just think it's important to be mindful of their time as well. That, if you go 15, 20, 30 minutes over the allotted time, that really can be very negatively impactful to the individual that's slotted time to speak with you. So it's just really important to have that agenda in place up front. So now this is my favorite part, which I think I say that on every topic, but the third thing was selling your company. This is so huge. We talked about it yesterday. There's 4 reasons that A players leave their right? And one is the job itself. 2 is the company. 3 is the people, the culture, and 4 is opportunity. Just generally speaking, opportunity, room for growth, nowhere to go from here, right? Those are the 4 reasons that A players will make a move. And I think, Jordan, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think there are some organizations that really still feel like it's an old school mentality of the candidate has to sell themselves. I don't have to sell. I'm the gift here. As the employer, as the hiring authority, we're the gift, like we're going to give you a job, and it's no longer, that isn't the case anymore. That is kind of an old school mentality. And so now you really have to know how to sell your company. And I call it the carrot. What's your carrot? What are you dangling in front of an individual to get them excited and engaged, and somebody who really wants to come, and they're going to go and do the hardest thing, which is walk into their current organization, hand over their notice, which, not everyone is disgruntled, and not everyone is making a move because they don't like their boss, right? When I first spoke with Jordan and I wanted to bring him in for an interview, it was a tough call because he did like where he was. He did like his current company, and he did like his current leader. He had really a very good situation. The only thing he didn't have was growth opportunity. And so, and he was just looking for an organization where he could expand and just have sort of more of a trajectory that he could get excited about. And so we had to really build a story, a narrative, around why us. And it was really, the onus was on us. It was on me to get you excited. It wasn't about you getting me excited about you. It is, but it's not just that. And so I think a lot of organizations forget that you really have to have something exciting about the
Mhm.
job, something exciting about the company, something exciting about your culture, and something exciting about the trajectory of the opportunity. And then I'll let you
Mhm.
speak to that too.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's important to kind of remind this is for A players. And like
Right,
Kim
right,
mentioned,
right,
A players, most of the time, they're going to be in a good opportunity. They're going to have a good company. They may not like their boss. I don't, it just depends. But a lot of times they're not going to be active candidates. They're going to be passive candidates. They're going to be people you reached out to about the opportunity.
right.
And just like if somebody was reaching out to yourself about a job, you need to make sure that there are reasons that they want to work for you. And those are the four main reasons somebody makes a job change. So just being able to sell to every one of those points is the most important thing. When it comes to me making the move to this company, to Aris Amplify, it was the opportunity for growth to build out a company under a large brand that really sold to my ability. I'm an entrepreneur and I like to build things. So I really wanted to be a part of that. The people, I've known Charles Aris for a while, but really getting to meet a lot of people and very nice people, a great place to work. And they really sold that, and they didn't just tell me it, they showed it to me constantly throughout the process. And from having just people reach out and call me to talk to me during the interview process that I didn't know. So that way I could get to know people in the organization before I made the change. They sold me on the 55 years of Charles Aris experience, and that's the background of the company that I was going to get to go work for, the stability, the reason, the proven ability of a company that I knew I was going to go into and be a part of for a long time. And then the job as well, being able to sell that. So being able to put all that into an elevator pitch, a 3-minute pitch that you can really sell everything in the company, and then also not only tell them, but show them in multiple ways as well.
Yes. So when we are meeting with organizations to determine if we're going to partner with them on a search, one of the questions that we ask is, what do you love about your organization? What's going to get these candidates excited about this job, this organization, the opportunity within the walls of the organization? And I can tell you probably 70% of the time they say we have a good culture. We have a good culture. And that's great. And I'm sure they do. But you've got to be able to peel the layers back. And what does
Mhm.
that actually mean? What does culture mean to you? And what does that mean to your organization? And how can we showcase that to a candidate to get them excited about this opportunity so that they're going to hang on for 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 interviews?
Mhm.
And keep you at the top of the running when they have multiple irons in the fire, so to speak. So I love that. I think that that's awesome. And it's, I think, one of the hardest things I think it's just the most challenging thing, rather, to
Mhm.
help employers understand just how essential that is.
Yes, and remember, if it seems like it's broad, everybody's probably saying it, and that's the
Yeah.
thing. Everybody thinks they work in a family culture. Everybody wants to think their work life is perfect, and so really knowing what that means to you and to the company is very important. And then also, I think it's just important to be able to show that. So your words, your actions do speak louder than your words a lot of times. So being able to and find little ways to do that. For example, we're working with a company and we had a candidate go on site for an interview, and they said they had a family culture and all this stuff, and again, it's all words. But then they had a group of people take him out to dinner for on a Friday night. They gave up their Friday night to take him out to dinner and treat him well while he was in town. That went a long way in making sure that he was interested in the opportunity. It really showed that they do have a family kind of environment in the facility.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's a great example. So, lastly, we wanted to talk about a few takeaways, things that we feel are so important and essential before you even engage in the interview process. Jordan and I talked about these things yesterday, and we think the 3 primary, before you post the job, before you make the first phone call to vet someone, before you bring anyone into the walls of your organization, know what you want, know what you need, and
Hmm.
know the market. And this is where, partners in this space, like working with a search firm, this is where they can be very, very valuable, especially the market, because they'll be able to give you intel as to comp in the space that you're looking, what your competitors are doing, those types of things. And so doing your due diligence first before you ever bring anyone in. But and I'll let you speak to this too, but the know what you want and know what you need. If you know those two things, your interview process can be very succinct, very concise, and very quick, and you don't risk losing a talent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's going through different practices of really being able to identify what you need. The what you need is the most important thing in this, right? At the end of the day, this is what we need this person to be able to accomplish. And so figuring out what you want them to accomplish, again, 30, 60, 90, 6 months, that's the most important time. That's why you're hiring for this job. So what do they need to be able to accomplish? And then what skills are needed to accomplish those things? Those are your needs. You need that right off the bat. So they have to have that skill set or they're not going to be successful early on. And then look at your wants. What do we need them to be able to do in the next 4, 5 years? Things like that. So that way you can get to a point where you're really building out. Those are the wants. If someone could do that, that's great. You don't have to teach them, but you have time to teach them that. So if they don't have it, you can accept that. And then knowing the market, if you want an experienced person, you have to pay for that. A players, the reason they go to work every day is money. So, I mean, there's other reasons, right? But that's why we all wake up and go to work. So, making sure the market, is there candidates that can do this? Is this actually a job? Can we match the comp of what we need? That's very important. And then geography wise, do we have to relocate somebody? Is there local talent? We need to be able to put relocation funds towards it if we need to relocate someone. Things like that need to all be decided before we even talk to the first candidate.
Right. I love that. And I would even say on that, know what you want. I actually want to have a little disclaimer there. And that is oftentimes what an organization wants is already written. Like they spent some time, right, pouring into this job description. They sat down, they created it. This is what they want. But oftentimes that entire litany or that list of wants on that job description is really what we like to call a wish list. There's like 3 to 5 things. I would say identify the 3 to 5 tangible hard skills that you want, things that you can actually vet. Things like we want somebody that's detail oriented. We get it. Everybody wants someone detail oriented, but that's a very difficult thing to identify in just a conversation. So you got to drill that down a little farther to, okay, but what tasks, what things can we ask in order to find out if someone is detail oriented rather than just the surface level? And that's just one example. But I would say understanding that the want is oftentimes a wish list, and you need to narrow that down to 3 to 5 tangible things that can actually be discussed and vetted.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say just on top of that, 85 to the ideal candidate is going to make up about 80 to 90%, 85 to 90% of the job description. So you're not going to have all 100% of the skills. So you need to figure out what skills they need to have that 100% of, and then figure out what this is going to fill up. What are we okay with them not having, and be able to move forward, because finding someone that 100% matches a job description is a lot of times a needle in a haystack and leaves you frustrated and not with the hire.
And I was just going to say, it leaves the role vacant for far, far too long, which we all know when a role is left vacant far longer than anticipated, that leaves a frustrated team, a frustrated hiring manager. It's impactful all across the board, oftentimes resulting in, overtime for those that are having to pick up the slack. There is a reason for the need for the role, right? And so you have to look at, okay, if I don't fill this position, who is being impacted in the organization? I think that's because oftentimes it's not always the hiring authority, right? It's not always them. There could be individuals on their team that are doing a great job covering it all, but have we asked them how they're doing, how they're handling it? And there's a reason those roles are that you're looking for that individual to begin with. Anything else that might be something that you'd like to add before we conclude?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of it. I would say kind of we've harped on it a lot, but really knowing what you want, what you need, and what you want your process to look like before you even hit the market is, I think, the most important thing. Because if you can really explain, that's going to attract a lot of candidates. Candidates don't want uncertainty. They like certainty. And so being able to be certain about what you want, what that process is going to look like is going to help you keep a lot of candidates interested and available as well.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for joining me on here today. I really appreciate it. For the guide, if anybody is interested, if you would like for us to send you this 17-page guide on how to build your interview process, please reach out to me and I would be happy to send it to you. My email address is kim.shapiro@charlesaris.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Also, Jordan Purdy, you can find him on LinkedIn. And I'll leave you with, if you're looking for talent on your team, we'd love to be able to assist. If nothing else, we'd love to be able to help you with that, know your market. Don't always have to work or engage with us. If you're just curious to know what's happening in the market, what hiring looks like right now in a specific space, reach out. We're happy to have a conversation.
Exactly. And we have comp studies, all things like that as well. So if there's anything that, for all of our fills and our verticals, so engineering and operations, if you want to know what someone should be making comp wise, just to make sure your team is being paid right.
Right.
And you can keep your A talent that's already on your team now and you're not going to have to replace people. Please reach out. We'd love to help in any way we can.
Absolutely. And lastly, almost forgot, follow us on LinkedIn. We would offer the Aris Amplify page and the Charles Aris Inc. page. Our marketing team is phenomenal. They put some outstanding content out there. So if you're not following us, you're missing some good stuff. Thanks.